Welcome back to today's episode of What the Bleep Do We Know? Or What the Bleep Are We Talking About? Plug. Great movie. Is that what the movie's called? What the Bleep Do We Know?
I showed it recently at a movie night at my house, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that. I love the basketball. The basketball doesn't touch the ground.
Yeah.
Welcome back to today's episode of What the Bleep Are We Talking About with Ian and Ryan, featuring a good friend and return guest,
Devon.
I got some feedback from a loved one about the feedback was, hey, I love Devon, but who is he? Can you tell us more about what brings you here and kind of maybe like a quick summation of how consciousness was catalyzed for you in your life?
Oh, boy, yeah, just in 5 minutes, huh?
No, 3.5.
What brought me here was, I think first and foremost was I love podcasts, and I've been thinking about ideas around if I could do one of my own and things like that. And I like this space along with public media and things like that. So when I had mentioned he was doing a podcast, I was naturally intrigued and kind of was actually wanting to work my way on in here. So success for me there.
Who are you?
Who am I?
This is backwards. This is episode 2 with this special honored guest, but
Better late than never.
Well, I believe that. So you asked, I believe the question was why am I here and who am I? So that's why I'm here. I love podcasting, and I love talking about consciousness ideas and men's work and all these kind of things. I think these conversations are also extremely important, and I also think it's important for men to model an alternative for what is sadly becoming a very shadowy mainstream form of masculinity. That's my judgment, but that's, so I also feel there's some mission behind it as well. It's another reason why I'm here. And third reason was I love my brother Ian. Anytime I can spend with him is a good thing. And I'm enjoying hanging out with you too. So who am I? I'm a white, straight, cisgendered man, middle-aged man who grew up in Boulder County, Colorado. I grew up in this town. My disclaimer, and my ego demands this, I also lived away for a long time. I've had the privilege of traveling the world. I've lived overseas. I've traveled professionally. My claim to fame is I've worked on all 7 continents.
Well,
which
that's
was kind of
cool.
one of my biggest life goals achieved. So who am I? What am I? I guess that's a tricky one. In summation, I'll say this. My undergraduate degree was in philosophy and geoscience. And really, for me, my kind of wandering the world, doing a lot of kind of scientific field work, also facilitated a lot of philosophical inquiry because I got a chance to travel to austere places in the world, really meet interesting people, and also because it was for work and it was for resource economy exploration or peaceful scientific research or whatever, different variations, there was no gimmick behind oh, I'm traveling and I'm conscious. It was actually the transactional nature of how I had to interact with the people I was working with really kind of actually cut away a lot of bullshit and allowed us to be real with each other. So that was a real gift in my life. How I came to consciousness, well, I think that goes back to a desire to study philosophy when I was younger. And I've always had this desire to kind of seek a higher truth, seek curiosity. Openness and curiosity are a big part of my core nature. And I would say it's really hard to find a summation of who I am definitively or anything like that. And I think that's actually a good question. I think a good answer, who am I? What am I? I don't know.
I think that's one of the reasons we're here.
Exactly. So, I will say a spiritual path has been, I grew up, my mother was evangelical Christian, but my father, who they were divorced at a young age, was very atheistic, agnostic. I had 2 very different perspectives. I was turned off by my mother's Christianity, just own that. I officially renounced Christianity. I was baptized at one point. I officially renounced it. I used a lot of scientific inquiry, and I dabbled in yoga, and I dabbled in different practices, but I really was missing a really depth in spiritual life. And various forms have kind of shown up in my life. I even say getting my tattoos are part of my spiritual practice. But I think men's work has become a big part of my spiritual practice. So I think that's also kind of tied to who I am and why I'm here, mission and purpose in healing masculinity, polarity. And I love kind of doing some kind of cafeteria components of spirituality. But I think going from doing things like ISTA, medicine work, meditation, all kinds of things, but I don't have any real definitive package. It's just my own special, unique thing for who I am, because I don't like to put myself in a box and put myself in a label.
Yeah.
That's one of my main practices in life. It's not what I am, it's what I do. And that can change.
Labeling is a dangerous thing, I believe. That could be a whole nother topic. What does cafeteria mean? What you use the term cafeteria?
So I'll explain that in a minute, but what else? I want to get to a completion about like who I am, what I am.
Yeah.
The question is I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm just a man in existence, and I'm just here to do my best. I think
that means a lot.
Some good questions came to me recently when I went to ISTA. There's questions around
What is ISTA?
International School of the Temple Arts.
Okay, cool.
And that's the retreat that I and I did recently.
Oh, cool.
But there's this one part where we were asked, what do we hold sacred? And I've been kind of actually wanting to answer this question. But I think a big part is just like, what I really do hold sacred is just like love and compassion. That's really quite that simple. I think I recently been processing this, and something else came up, but I forget right now, and I'm not going to force it, because that's, again, these practices of like what I hold sacred, it can change and evolve. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but in Mankind, in Mankind Project, we work on inner essence. And I also believe that's something that can change and evolve. Just like how Native people, they change their names over time. And so another good question too is when there's also this idea around who do you serve? And so I haven't answered that right now. For me right now, my kind of spiritual goddess, my kind of devotional practice I have is to grandmother medicine. And that is also something that might change. So that is my completion, is that I'm a dynamic, fluid being who is evolving and who just is doing my best.
Here to learn.
Here to learn, to be in this plane and be curious. And ultimately, I would define myself, this is a label I put on myself, as an agnostic.
Okay.
So that's a lot. There's a lot there, but yeah.
I really love what you said about doing my best.
Yeah. And I would like to answer your question about this idea of like cafeteriaism.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you go to the spiritual restaurant and you might walk down a little bit. It's like, you remember first cafeterias when you were younger? You old enough to remember those?
I remember like going to the cafeteria at school.
Any school, like basically, right?
We went to Country Buffet a lot.
Even
here
Country
in
Buffet, right?
Mall.
So you're walking around
Country Buffet, or
Golden Corral.
Yeah.
Oh man, some Golden Corral. So you go there, right? And so basically the idea is it's like you go to the spiritual buffet. It's like, oh, I'm gonna take some of these like Buddhist potatoes and do my Vipassana meditation. And ooh, look at the really nice like sacred sexuality macaroni and cheese. I'm gonna have some of that.
Yo.
And for the main course, I'm gonna have a slice of that, some of the turkey breast of the medicine work right there, type thing. And also just because this is not for me. I grew up I'm not Catholic, but some people might be like, because I grew up Catholic, I do like holding rosary beads when I meditate. Right, blending these things together. This idea of like. I heard that term on a podcast. This was actually about a woman who grew up Catholic, and her father kind of chastised her for saying, you can't be a cafeteria Catholic. You can't just take the parts you like, and you can't, and you have to like follow, like, this is a very conservative, you have to follow like the way, right? And her answer and my answer to that would be like, fuck you, bullshit. Like I'm going, no, that's not how it works. Like these things evolve and are dynamic, and there's all kinds of practices. There's like, I had such an aversion to prayer because of my distaste for evangelical Christianity, and even now, certain ceremony, there's even in places like ISTA or prayer can be a really beautiful thing, But it's hard for me to go there because I have such a distaste for it. But that's something that I can take from that practice of right Christianity type thing.
Yeah, my dad fashioned himself a recovering Catholic.
Yeah,
and I was raised very spiritually. I believe. I studied world religions because I was really curious about what all the hubbub was about. And one thing that the class kept asking the teacher was, what religion are you? The teacher. And she said she was an ecumenical existentialist. And I actually now fashion myself an ecumenical existentialist. And this is because of what I've seen in life.
And for somebody who may not understand what that means, how would you define that?
An ecumenical existentialist is someone that believes there is truth in everything. And my personal belief is that regardless of what you believe in, it's really important that you believe in something. Because belief drives our will. I actually wrote down thoughts lead our thoughts, lead to our beliefs, and our beliefs lead to our actions, which then feed back into our thoughts. So if you don't believe in something greater, I believe it's easier to get lost or run over. So I really like that you talk so much about faith and spirituality.
Yeah, and there are things I struggle with, even like belief and all that kind of stuff.
One of the things I wanted to talk about today was spiritual accountability. By the way, this is episode 2 of accountability.
If you can't tell.
Yeah, well, that was a nice long one. I also feel grateful, and I feel like this sense of honor for like wanting me for the invite to like kind of explain my background and things like that.
Yeah.
So that felt really nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm grateful too. It's hard to, once you get to a certain level of experience in life, the desire for me, I'm not saying I'm that experienced in life, but the desire for me when I communicate with people is to go to a deep level pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I'm not a very surface level human being, for better or for worse. Mm-hmm. And that can be hard to do in an hour with 3 different people, talking about big topics. And I feel really humbled by a lot of the things you just said. Oh. So I'm grateful you were willing to share. And I put you on the spot, so thank you for your patience.
That was a good.
Who are you and what are you?
That was a great challenge. It's I like trying to we do a lot of this in men's work. We have like time check-ins where you have to like get to the point in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I definitely took a little extra time on that one, but I feel like I did a pretty decent job of it. I like how you reference like belief. How belief channels will, and will is such a beautiful philosophical topic. Like, what is that, and how do you define it? And it was one of those like really esoteric parts of spirituality and soul. That'd be a good show topic.
Totally. Well, there's that old quote, and forgive me for not knowing exactly who said it, but whether you believe you're right or you believe you're wrong, or whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right.
Right. Yeah.
Our if I believe things can change, it opens the door for change. If I believe things will never change, then I will manifest behavior to make sure it doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ian, how are you?
Good.
Do you want to talk about your
taking it all in? No.
Okay.
The thing that I just was tracking here was hearing this idea about will and a desire. I think we have this shared desire, like let's try to find that through line from the last episode and bring it in. Ooh, and how could will be a part of that? I think there are people that have a higher level of consciousness around a desire to be attentive to how they show up in the world, the impacts that they create, intended or implied, and so they have this will that holds them and their intention and attention around the ways and things that they're doing. So in particular, last time we spoke about accountability, boundaries, impacts, capacity for one to be self-accountable or use community to support an accountability. And I think that there's this concept of will is really important in all that, because without that will, my judgment is that somebody's really just kind of wandering through the haze of life and not concerned about who they are, how they are in the world, and the way that may relate to others around them. Yeah. And in particularly their relationships and then their closest relationships.
Well, and I see people take refuge in opposite ends of the spectrum of the will to be aware of how their behavior affects themselves and others, and the will to ignore how their behavior affects others and themselves. I see that played out in everyone I meet to different degrees.
Right, and I think unfortunately for us in these current days, politics shows a lot of that as well.
Yeah, a lot of dualistic thinking.
In no way do I want to talk about politics, but I think it may be a good example to look at, like how choices impact people.
I'll say something about politics, just real quick, because there's a lot of blaming going on, and blaming is a big part of accountability.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Or lack of accountability.
or lack of accountability. So my question to you and all our listeners is, what are you doing to hold the fabric of our society together or to tear it apart? And that doesn't have to be like an answer it right now, but like think about it, right? Because everybody loves to blame the government, blame the other party, blame the other people. But what are you doing to rip it apart or hold it together?
Well, this was also what my original kind of what I proposed last time was how do we deal with others who can't or won't be in accountability, right? And this is the first thing that came to my mind when you said how are you not like, what was the statement again? It was like, how do we like,
What are you doing?
what are we doing to kind of like synthesize the fabric of community
To hold it
tear
together or rip it apart.
And so I think it can come down to some real simple basics. So one thing, I statements, right? So if you, it's like, well, the way the you can be like, okay, well, when you do this, I feel this, or my reaction is this, and how I can control my reaction to things, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a big part of dealing with when we have a judgment that someone else is out of account and they're affecting us and they won't have accountability, it's hurting us. That's a big part of like this balance between, okay, I don't like what you're doing, and I judge that what you're doing is out of account, and this is where the boundary comes in and how I can control my response. That's I think a big foundational. That's like a fundamental. That's like the bunny slope of a skiing reference for those that don't know. That's
Beginner. Yeah.
What's that?
The beginner.
That's like the beginner, like basic, like track of just start. Like these little practices of where this begins to where I'll just share this. Like you mentioned who I am, what I am. Part of my mission statement with Mankind Project is through self-love and compassion for others, I create a world of healing and restoration. The way in which I foster healing and restoration in this world, one of the basic building blocks is just working with I statements. That's just
And that it's easier said than done because a lot of people grow up in environments and with parents where your feelings are not okay. So in order to hold others accountable, you have to first understand how their behavior makes you feel. And that's the beginning. That you might not ever be able to holding someone accountable that is unwilling or unable to see how their behavior affects others. They'll take it as an attack. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's a lot there because you first have to allow yourself to feel and not make yourself wrong for how you feel in order to then communicate it with integrity and then hope that you are heard. I actually had go ahead.
Yeah, I hear what you're sharing there, and that's like the biggest challenge because I judge we're not as a society really skilled at presence with our own internal experience, and therefore we're far more in reaction to the experience instead of providing a thought through or thought out response to the experience. And as I was listening to Devon share this idea that came up for me in terms of like just at a basic level of communication, how do we relate with one another with the intention of not amplifying or escalating whatever difference exists. And the idea that popped in my head was like, oh yeah, that's nonviolent communication. That simple model of owning what our experience is, recognizing where the other fits in that, expressing our experience, requesting something that you want to be different, and looking for how to do that in a mutually beneficial way. So there's a way in which like the people are being drawn together to search for some kind of a mutually accepted outcome instead of just a win or a lose.
Mutual understanding.
Yeah.
That I was reading this morning about how blame plays into accountability or lack of accountability. And one of my favorite authors is Deepak Chopra. Shout out. He wrote that you can still, you're okay if I read this real quick? It's just a short paragraph from Deepak. But it says, you can still take responsibility for your life and actions without blaming yourself or others. You can look at a situation, and this can be counterintuitive, but you can do it without judging it necessarily. But it says responsibility in a spiritual context is different than the egocentric sense of responsibility where we identify ourselves with our actions and consequences. To be spiritually responsible is the same as being present and living in the moment. We accept reality as we find it in our present experience without trying to escape the past or future. That is taking responsibility without blame. We are all doing the best we can with our present knowledge, ability, and state of consciousness. There is no blame in that. Recognize that you cannot change the future or past. It is only the present moment that you are free to act. That's not a clear-cut point I was trying to make, but I feel like it's all connected, right? Where one question that just came up is, am I really being accountable if I'm blaming you for how I feel?
I think it's like it's a 50-50 because it's blaming. You can say that. I mean, I guess the question is, these are just terms of semantics. Is blaming different than stating impacts? Mm-hmm. Right. And but in many ways, one can argue that stating impacts is like a rebrand of blaming, because in a form it kind of is, right? But it's also but again, a stated impact. When you do this, I'm feeling that. It's more of an objective statement, as opposed to a moral judgment, which is what blaming is all about, right?
Yeah, this behavior makes me feel this way. It's not the behavior that you're exhibiting makes you bad, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And of course, there could still be. You can also. And this is where like stating judgment. I also judge that you're doing that because you're not attuned to my feelings, and that also causes an impact or what's going on, right? Like, it could be like even like, let's say, take children. Like when you smash my Lego tower, it makes me feel this way, and of course inside there's like a fuck you for smashing my Lego tower, and you can also say, why are you smashing my Lego tower? Like what's going on? Like that's kind of not okay, and that's staying a boundary, and of course all you can really, and this goes back to all you can really do is just kind of say, well, I'm not going to play with you anymore if you're going to smash my Lego tower. But there's always something about that, though, that doesn't feel complete. There's something about, it's wrong that you smashed my Lego tower. What the fuck's wrong with you? You know? And that's the hard part. How do we deal with that? And then you zoom way out, I'm just going to say it, we have adult children running the fucking government. Okay? That's my judgment and opinion. And when you read the Deepak Chopra quote, I thought, those people are doing their best. That's all they're resourced for. And there's all kinds of things that led them to be in those positions. But how, and there's so much anger that comes up around certain things. And there's definitely my own shadow to blame. And it's such a difficult thing, because what do we do with this like feeling like we've been wronged? And sometimes I feel like just setting boundaries, well, I'm not going to play with you anymore. It's just, there's something intrinsically for me that sometimes that just doesn't cut it. I want some kind of justice.
It's a very natural feeling. There's an old quote that I love that says, people can only meet you as far as they can meet themselves. And I do believe that there is actual good and actual evil in the world. You know, without getting into any form of religion or story about good and evil, I believe that exists in every human being, the capacity for good and the capacity for evil, however you define it. I define evil as like murdering someone. Right? The ignorance that allows, or the intent that kills. You know, and it was a hard pill for me to swallow, to realize that no matter what I do, this will always continue to exist because it's part of human nature. So I might not ever get a sense of justice for what the government does. I just might not. It would be wonderful to see like a revolution, you know, and have good utopia come out of it, you know, like a Star Trek scenario. That's my dream. But when faced with the possibility that it won't, or that the killing and the death and the exploitation and the destruction will continue, The only place that I know to think to go right now is a mindfulness practice, where when I studied mindfulness, the essence of what mindfulness was, in my understanding, was the ability to accept death and be at peace with death itself. So even if you have a gun to your head, which people in this world do have, you can still, according to the practices of mindfulness, find peace in that moment and choose to still be grateful for the fact that you got to experience anything at all. It's way easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
But that's where my drive to talk about accountability and my interest in accountability and self-accountability and mindfulness meet. How do we exist in this world full of injustice and still find a way to be grateful for what we have and hopefully share that, right? That's my mission for this conversation, is like, I'm trying to figure that out myself.
Yeah, I think accountability is one of the tools in the toolbox. I would say accountability is like one of the tool trays. Like I mentioned, like I statements and things like that. Like I work in GIS, and like there's like the toolbox, there's a tool tray, and there's individual tools, right? Accountability is like one of the tool trays. Kind of comes out of the toolbox. I feel as though, and so there's lots of different facets of it.
You've been kind of quiet over there, Ian.
Yeah, taking all of this in. How this is landing for me is, really like to the like present moment experience of where we are in this conversation and where we are like greater in the world, and maybe in the rings of like in my little community and in the city I live in, and the state I live in, and the country I live in, and the world I live in. And I like what your inquiry is here is like, how do I do this under these circumstances that we're faced with today? And it, and the point of meditation is really, being with your present moment experience. Like, that's it. That's all there is to it. And to build a skill set around not having judgment with that experience, but acknowledgement of it, like in as neutral of a way as possible, is I'm angry, and be present to that feeling, felt sense experience, and maybe even the stories and messages of that, without it needing to be anything more than an awareness of it. I think where a lot of people get challenged is that there isn't a huge skill set to be able to do that. And so what happens is something happens externally or internally, and as a way in which, or the only way we as a society typically respond to that is in reaction to it. That reaction is typically emotional. That emotional reaction is driven by a lot of history and stories and beliefs and meanings and everything that like kind of has come together to that point to make up the person, who they are and how they are. And we don't have control over that at all. And so the only real control that we have in any sense of the word of control is really what we choose for ourselves. And how do we keep slowing everything down? And that to me is like the biggest piece. It's what I've seen most valuable to me, and when I've worked with other people as a coach, when people can slow down and they recognize that they're in reaction or on the verge of reaction, is the only place that choice can become available to us.
I hear a recurring theme here is boundary. I was wondering how to describe a more practical approach to setting boundaries. And one thought that I had is, would you be willing to tell a story from your life of a time where you did not feel someone was acting in account, or being accountable for their actions, and you had to set a boundary?
You're looking at me.
Whoever. I'm thinking.
I could go first too.
Do you have one?
I had to set a really, really, really hard boundary with the group of friends that I grew up with when I stopped drinking. And ultimately, that boundary meant no more communication at all. I had to let go of the friends that I had who knew me as the Ryan that I was growing up, which I'm proud of myself. I am. I went through a lot, and I wasn't perfect, and I messed up a lot, and I really scared the living daylights out of myself and my family. But I'm still here, and I learned. But they knew a Ryan that didn't know how to stick up for himself. And when Ryan started sticking up for himself, it got really grindy. So ultimately, I feel that I outgrew that group, and they wanted to keep me in a little box that was clearly labeled. And in order to hold myself accountable to believing in myself and advocating for myself, the me that believed in myself, I had to let go of those relationships. That was a hard boundary. That's the one that just came up for me when you asked me.
Yeah, I got one. First off, are you open to a reaction to that?
Absolutely.
So this can happen a lot too, is that what you mentioned about how sometimes when you set a boundary, people take it as an attack. And they liked the old Ryan because it probably suited their needs, right? And then when you started this is a common thing when people kind of like go through a lot of spiritual or self-growth, certain relationships can fall away because it can in many ways, it can reflect back to them of their own, I don't know, how do I put this? I was going to say their own lack or their own sort of, this is a judgment, but their own unconsciousness, their own, and that can be scary and confronting as well. So they project it back onto you as an attack. And that's kind of what boundaries are in general, because it's really kind of taking control. And sometimes in relationship dynamics, there's a lot of control beings that are in different directions. So that's just an interesting kind of example of that. For me, I think the primary example in my life was with my mother. We have a really interesting dynamic, and I have a lot of love and respect for my mother. She is an intense, powerful woman. I mean, she's smart as fuck, but she's also deeply spiritual. She's deeply conservative and deeply Christian, evangelical, and she's a beautiful woman, but she has a lot of faults. And this is my judgment, but this is a woman who cannot back down and cannot admit she's wrong about anything, and has a strong sense of moral authority. Okay, so a lot of the boundaries, I just started setting boundaries with her. And this was in order so that, as a lot of people can probably relate to this, I'll speak for myself in I statements, though, that there's a lot of baked-in dynamics. There's times I would find myself as a grown-ass man in my late 30s. Now I'm in my 40s. I go to the house, and all of a sudden it's like the dynamic is back, like I'm 17 again. And I'm acting like a 17-year-old. And she's even acting like a younger version of herself with these like played-out dynamics. And a big part of that round kind of had to do with our, as I always would tell her, our fundamentally different perception of the universe, how it's constructed, who's behind it, whatever, all of that kind of stuff. But I started setting boundaries in that relationship, and it began with simply, when I come over to the house, you got to turn Fox News off. Because my stepdad would listen to it full. It's on all the time. Typical boomer shit, it was a judgment. And so I was like, if I come over here, turn that shit off. If you don't, I'm going to just walk right out the fucking door. And there were times, there was times, I'd go over there and my stepdad would be like watching Fox News, and he was all into Tucker Carlson, and she's patting him like, Dave, turn it off. Devon's here. And he kind of didn't want to do it. And she I saw her honoring the boundary. She knew time with me is valuable. That was my boundary. Just turn that shit off. When we're here, we're not doing that. It became and then there's been this kind of detente around, we're just not going to talk about politics. And that's a tricky one, right? Whatever. And then then the boundary kind of solidified, because we're starting to narrow down to the real problem that was causing the diversion of our relationship. Then it became, I started setting a boundary around her projecting. This is the end. We're going to fast forward a few steps to the end point. I no longer allow her to project the guilt that she wished my father had felt for leaving the family onto me. She no longer gets to do that. And and the tone shift, the body language, as soon as she does that stuff, I stop it. Not doing that. We're not doing that. That's not mine. No fucking way. And that has really improved our relationship a lot. Because for me, ending my relationship with my mother is a deal breaker. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And I do just want to honor her too by after saying that. Like the things I love about my mother is that she was a teacher. And so she gave me the gift of curiosity. I think big part of the reason why I explored the world like I did was we had National Geographics in the house. I mean, it was like, and
super cool.
And she and I love going to art museums together. And this is something that she doesn't have with my brother or my stepdad. This is something that she and I do. I do classical music dates with my friends. I take her along. It's really, I'm now in this boundary has allowed me to now bring her more into my life and start merging her with my world where I can example, in November, I put a group of people together to go see the symphony in Denver. And I brought 2 friends and my mom, and it was super fun.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I want to kind of caveat this with what the effect can really be.
Yeah.
When there's real love there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. My goal is to bring these I feel bad for using the term arbitrary, these sort of generalized statements of accountability and lack of accountability and boundaries into relatable stories.
Yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah, I want to make it as accessible as possible, and that drives back towards if you are struggling with feeling like you are not in control of your life or your own behavior or feelings, how do you start working towards feeling like you are driving the ship? How do you work towards feeling confident in yourself? How do you work towards being able to look in the mirror and love what you see? So
my version. Or
one of them.
Yeah, this one. My struggle was I was trying to remember about how old I was. It's probably mid-20s is my guess. I was working in the industry of show jumping horse training.
Cool.
I used to be a horse trainer. I was being mentored at that point and was working under the mentorship of this trainer that I'd known for a long time and who I had really thought was more than a mentor, was a friend. I knew his family, his kids. I would stay at the house. There was a lot of what I had made the story up around. There was a lot of worth and value and connection that was felt for me, and what I brought in terms of value and support to him and his business, and even sometimes to his family. And then there was this incident where I got hurt. I got kicked by a stallion, and it broke my leg in a couple places. And just prior to this was, I think, happened in January. And so just prior to the first of the year, he made this big announcement of hey, I'm changing the structure of the business, and nobody's going to be an independent contractor anymore. Everybody's going to be an employee, and you're all going to have, medical coverage, and everything's, up and up, and it's all good. And this is how to do this best for everyone. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So then this injury happens, and I'm thinking oh, okay, I have nothing to worry about. And as a result of sort of how I had viewed this individual, I didn't worry. I thought this guy has my back. And I ended up not going to the hospital at first. And then because he didn't, it turns out he didn't want me to go to the hospital because of the fact that there actually was no insurance.
Oh.
And drove me back up from Southern California, way down south to the area where we lived, and then had a friend who's a doctor see me. And it was clear I needed surgery to repair the fractures. And everything just started feeling weirder and weirder. There was something disconnection and distance, and just everything was shifting. And at the time, I'm in intense pain and needing to have surgery, and I go through all this stuff. And eventually what I come to find out is this guy never had insurance. And not only did he not have insurance, that what he was attempting to do is blame me and say that I was at fault and that I should be responsible for all of the expenses associated with my medical care now. And I was in this really difficult place. Like, that's not okay, but this is a person that I thought had my best interest at heart, and I'd known for years, and I'm like, I don't know how to navigate this any longer. Like, I'm just in pure disarray, confusion, and overwhelm around all of it. And fortunately, my uncle has, in his work, has a fair amount to do with like workman comp injury stuff. And he's like, you don't have a lot of time, and you should probably talk to a lawyer. And I'm like, oh my God, a lawyer? No, I don't want to talk to a lawyer. I don't want to do that. And time kept going, and there was no help coming, and it was all this blame. And finally I was like, oh, I don't know what else to do. I guess I need to talk to this lawyer. And then in talking to the lawyer, I come to find out the law, and that that this guy can't blame me for this. I was working under his employment and fully under his direction, and that what they're doing is illegal. And I had to get clear, like, this person that I had faith and trust in is not treating me from that same perspective. Like, they are not caring for me in any way whatsoever. And I had to make this choice, like, oh, I am going to have to commit to this lawyer. And I only had like some weird thing, like at the point of time, it was like a week or two. I'd already had the surgery and everything. And it was like a week or two left in the statute of limitations. And I was like, I guess I don't have a choice. I'm going to have to take care of myself. And I contacted the lawyer again. I said, I guess this is what I'm going to have to do now. And it was so heart-wrenching in some respects for me to have to like define that boundary. And then the whiplash that came from it as well. The next thing I know, the guy that I used to work for is running around telling people how I'm just such an asshole, and now I'm just trying to do this just to get money from him, and make me out to be some horrible person.
But you stuck up for yourself.
Yeah. So it was realizing, like, I'm at this line, this very defined line, like I have to stay on. Which side of the line am I going to stay on? And the side of the line I had been on was not in my best interest, even though I thought I was doing the right thing and having like trust in people and people that claimed they had my best interest at heart, and none of that was actually true.
So I just want to jump in here that I am tracking my reaction of anger around that.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately why, so this is a good example. This is why I brought this topic of how do we deal with accountability when others, I guess when I say when others won't or can't be accountable, this is what's commonly referred to as a bad faith actor versus good faith actor. How do we deal with these bad faith, I'm just going to say it, motherfuckers that we have to deal with in our lives? And it's hard. And I'm watching my own anger and like sense of insight. It's like, what the fuck, man? And of course, he's protecting his own assets and whatever because he doesn't want to pay out. It probably is going to ruin him. This is going to cost me. But he can't be accountable for that. Working with horses is fucking dangerous. And he didn't do his end of the deal. He did not.
He flat out lied.
Yeah. Can't be accountable for that. It is infuriating. And of course, again, I'm going to go back. We've that cat's out of the bag about politics. Like, we're watching this like sense of bad faith actors like toxically rise, like not toxic. That's a wrong adjective. Rise to the top, and now it will affect our lives. And there's this massive practice of acceptance around it.
I know that we're near the end of our hour mark. Do we want to go a little longer today?
I can go a little longer.
Yeah.
We do like another 15, so give us another 30.
Yeah.
So what would that be a total of?
30 more minutes.
Oh, total of 30 more?
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I feel like we've been talking for 5 minutes.
I know, me too.
It's already been 45.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those. I love personal stories because I feel stories are, I can always find a way I relate to the characters in a story. I want to flip it on its head, though, and ask you both, and all I want to share myself is, what was a time in your life where you weren't accountable to yourself? And did you overcome that somehow? Did you become accountable to yourself?
Yeah, I think I have a recent one.
You willing to share?
Yeah. So I think when I'm not accountable to myself, I'm ultimately not accountable for others. And a lot of this has been around how I've showed up in relationship, particularly with, I'm a straight man, so with like women that I date and things like that. The one that first came up was a very recent example of when I started dating my now ex-girlfriend. Since I've last spoken with you, I've ended that relationship because I believe I was out of account by being in that relationship. So I feel like I use relationship as a coping mechanism. I judge myself to use relationship as a coping mechanism or a form of avoidance for doing some deeper work.
Yeah.
And I'm not, there's a lot of work this is very alive for me right now. A lot of work around like basically when I looked at like ending this relationship with this, which it was a lovely, beautiful, healthy, amazing relationship. But it just, but when I looked at myself ending it, it's like I felt like I'm out of account if I stay in it, and I'm repeating a pattern by staying in it. I'm also repeating a potential pattern by leaving it. Either way, I'm seeing like patterns in both. I'm not sure where that is, and this is where I just have to trust and just kind of really go with what feels inside. And inside, there's just some intrinsic, I'm not sure why, but it doesn't feel in alignment being a relationship. But what it is was, I entered that relationship when I was still very wounded and grieving over a previous relationship.
Very common practice.
Very common practice, right? And I feel that I felt that even though this turned out to be a really healthy relationship and turned out to be an amazing gift, because I feel I was out of account because I was unable to cope on my own. And of course, goes back to only I can do it, but also at about the same time, we can't do this alone. Kind of paradox. And so ultimately, I feel that in many ways, it was like it wasn't wrong or out of account to be in the relationship, but when it came down to she wanted to like take it to the next level and go into partnership, that was out of account for me. Maybe this is an example where I did do the right thing or something. But I feel not the right thing, the accountable thing. But I feel as though entering that relationship and kind of the way it escalated was an example of being out of account. But the more I talk about this, the more I was in. I think actually I was in account the whole time because I was owning it as we were going along, and when it came down to ending it, I did. But I think but how I showed up in a relationship before, the pattern that was being repeated that I was owning was how I was accountable for a lot in the past. I have stayed in relationships way too long for either fear of confrontation for ending them or fear of being alone. And then, of course, and just completely avoiding around all of that. And that lack of accountability toward myself for doing the work I need to just be okay being me also deeply affected others and caused a lot of and resulted in this kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of relationships a lot. So that got kind of a little messy. It's kind of interesting how...
Well, one question I have is, you were describing this pattern. Were while you were going in and out of these relationships, were you telling yourself you wanted to give yourself time to grow and you weren't?
Yes.
Okay.
Even the one before that. So here's a good example. The relationship before that with this woman that I was with for 2 years, and I was out of account with myself a lot in that relationship because this is a person who is a complicated thing because I have a lot of still love for her, but also have a lot of resentment and pain and this is the thing, this is a good example because every time I'll catch myself processing this previous relationship, the one that ended last fall before I started dating this new woman. Every time I do this practice, this is now, every time when I vent or process a relationship and just talk about here's how I feel hurt and wronged, I always like to caveat with, and I kept choosing that. I kept choosing it.
Ooh.
I kept choosing to be in this relationship that wasn't working for me. So that is an example. And then that one began when I was devastated over another one. And I entered that one in this wounded. So I keep entering these relationships because I don't give myself time to breathe and wound. And that is a pattern I am trying to break.
And it's not an easy one.
No.
The most terrifying thing I have ever seen was myself.
I like that's a good one.
And how you show up, or how I show up,
And how my behavior is affecting others.
Yeah.
And how my behavior was affecting me.
Yeah.
Do you have an example you want to share?
Yeah.
Thank you, by the way, Devon.
Yeah, and I want to say thanks for like going on that journey with me because
That's a really powerful
it was
example.
a very circuitous route to kind of get to where.
No,
we're
I'm
going
really
with that,
grateful you brought that up because that is a huge thing in life. You know, we use others to fill our holes.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous road.
Yeah. Sure is.
Yeah. So I feel a lot of hesitancy about sharing this and fear,
Good. That's why you need to right now.
and it's mostly
Too late. You
about
stepped off.
it's mostly about how this may impact others is the concern. So I'm naming that up front. But
Maybe use different names. Tell it like it's a story about other people. This is not about Ian's personal life.
Or is one of us in the room?
No, no, that would be easy. No, there's
I take
no
that
way
as a compliment.
There's no way of getting around that. Definitely. But the place that I most recently have been so severely out of account with myself was when I became a father, when I found out I was going to be a father. And I wasn't prepared. I didn't want it. And I didn't really stand up for what I wanted. And I didn't stand up for what I wanted because I had so much fear of losing this person that I was in love with. And that it was an either or. There was no way that there's going to be an outcome here that I could get what I wanted all the way around. And my insecurity and lack of, I guess, self-confidence and belief in myself led me to the decision of, well, okay, I guess I'm just gonna figure out how to be a father now. And that didn't go very well for quite some time, and it also really deteriorated the relationship, which ultimately failed. And then I was even worse off because I was like, now I'm a single father and didn't ever want to be a father. And it's taken years for me to move through all of that, the intensity of that, the self-abandonment and judgment I have about myself for not setting that boundary, not being clear about what it was that I wanted and was clear about what I wanted. But what's come out of it, and we're now 6.5 years or so later, is this immense shift that I'm experiencing. I'm in the middle of, I wouldn't say it's completed, of recognizing myself as a father, being so intentional around how I am as a father, how I foster my connection and my relationship with my son, with the intention of well, let me step back for a second. One of the reasons why I never wanted to be a father was just I didn't believe that there was any part of me that had any sense or knowledge of what that meant to be. I was not shown by my experience of my relationship with my father what I thought a healthy father-son relationship looked like. And there was immense amount of fear that I had nothing better than that to give. And so in the last 6 years since my son's been born, I've been working really hard to overcome that sense of who I thought I was as a father and how flawed I must be as a father because of my childhood experience, and have actually started to feel like I'm not doing so bad. And
you're doing the best you can. And that's all you could ever ask of yourself.
Well, but more important is that I'm doing better than I thought I was capable of.
Ooh.
And that's the big piece.
So what was the thing you were telling yourself you were going to do that you didn't?
I just figured like I was just going to be a replica of my father and how my father showed up as a father. So you weren't holding yourself accountable to believe in yourself? You were letting yourself defeat yourself? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I understand what you mean.
That was a big part of it for sure. Fortunately, I'm pretty tenacious and never really accepted that either. Although there's an immense amount of fear, I never fully accepted that, or would maybe even a better way to put it would actually tolerate that from myself. Mm-hmm. And I did a fair bit of reading and trying to educate myself and learn about it. Now, I think my relationship with my son is as good as it could be. And I've chosen to start to shift the way I work with people and the coaching work that I do, and I'm wanting to focus all of my effort on supporting fathers.
In the time I've known you, I've seen your heart lighten up.
Yeah. I've seen that too, and I love the reflection because it confirms my inner experience.
Yeah. You're fun. Thank you both. What came up for me that I'd like to share is my relationship with grief. It hit me like a truck just a couple years ago that for probably over 5 years now, ever since one of my closest friends drank himself to death, and ever since my father had a heart attack and died, I entered this pattern of actively escaping processing grief instead of actually processing grief. So that manifested in a lot of substance use and sensory intake. I inundated myself with distraction, constantly watching something on the TV, constantly listening to something, constantly reading. The most painful and agitating and uncomfortable and awful thing for me was to sit in a room alone without any distraction, because my thoughts and feelings would just explode, and I would be shaking with a sense of existential dread, a sense of I am not safe, I am not okay. Mm-hmm. Those were the feelings that were big for me, and I knew that I wanted to read at night instead of watch shows. I knew that I wanted to sit on my porch instead of working on something. But I could never do it, because every time I don't want to say I couldn't do it. It was like I ended up justifying not doing it in the name of the sense of comfort I got from distracting myself from my own grief. Mm-hmm. And the grief started manifesting in really powerful ways in my life that negatively impacted my relationships, especially because I would go through massive mood swings. I would be triggered by everything. I would react really violently. And it wasn't really because of what was going on in front of me. It was because there was this massive well of emotion underneath everything that just would blow up every time something poked the top of it. So there were nights where I wanted to go home. I desperately wanted to go home. It was a Tuesday night. I had to be up at 5 the next morning for work. and I'd stop at the liquor store on the way home, you know, and I'd end up waking up the next morning feeling like death, you know, and I'd hate myself for it. My self-esteem would dip, right? And so I think that's, you know, I'm kind of adamant about taking that side and helping people be more comfortable talking about, you know, addiction is very large in our society and people are very isolated because of it. So I'll be the, you know, the pillar of like that, you know, topic, but, and I'm willing to be vulnerable about it. But those times where I wanted to go home and sit and read and have a great night's sleep and I didn't, were some of the hardest times when I wasn't being accountable to my desire to help myself. And a lot of it was because I didn't really understand what was going on. I couldn't feel the feeling and understand and recognize and say, oh, that's my grief. That's not this nebulous sense of existential dread that makes me feel like I'm lesser and wrong and unsafe. That's just like pain and hurt, you know, that I haven't done anything with, which then projected out into the world where all I could see was pain and hurt in the world, you know?
Sure.
Can we get really practical for a second? And I always have this drive to give our listeners like some step that they can do to just start working towards however they want to change their life. But one thing that I loved what you said was, it was the idea of if we're suffering, sometimes that's what we're committed to, even though we don't know it or we don't think it. Like we want to get fit, but I can come up with a million reasons why not to go to the gym, right? So it's like if I'm unhealthy and sick and sad, the truth is, and if that's not changing, the truth is then that I'm actually unconsciously committed to not being healthy, but I don't know it. Right? So I want to be able to connect, like I want to bring awareness to, I believe that I was told once that whatever I have in life, I deserve. And that struck me in a lot of different ways. That brought up a lot of emotion. You know, there are things in this world happening to people that they don't deserve. But for anyone living a life stuck in some kind of mindset, whether that's an empowering one or one of, say, victim, I do believe that what we have in life is actually what we're committed to. If we're wanting to give ourselves time to heal on our own, but we constantly get into a relationship, we're actually committed to getting into a relationship. If I want to get sober, but I justify drinking every night, I'm actually committed to drinking every night. Right? So what would the beginning, how, if you were to describe how to be accountable to someone, where would you start?
Okay, so I think I've hit on this, and I'll give a little context to it. But what it really comes down to self-awareness for me on this one. So there was a thing that came up earlier when you were speaking about. There's this idea of like we talked about, like, well, you're doing your best, but also, well, I'm doing my best. That's like that can be a cop out for being accountable. And then there was this key thing, and I was actually pondering that. And then and when you were saying how, well, then I would like stop at the liquor store, then I'd get booze, and then I'd wake up next day, and then my self-esteem would take a fucking tank. So this is where the grace is like, okay, I'm out of account. I can forgive myself, and of course, there's work on forgiving others too. However, I want better for myself. So that's the first part, is like balancing that juggle, because sometimes grace and forgiveness can be just a cop out for just avoiding bad behavior. Well, I'm doing my best, right? And then sometimes you get, and sometimes in our friend group, this is where like group accountability is a useful thing. It says, you said that the last 5 times, just so you know. You know, maybe what are you going to do different, right? Sometimes that tough love can be useful. But so where I'm getting with this is this idea of, so for me, for example, I mentioned how when I was getting out of this relationship, I saw a pattern of, okay, so what you were saying, how we're choosing this thing, or it's what we get what we deserve. And now I'm feeling these feelings of loneliness and isolation, and it's like, and I've judged myself for being a 45-year-old single guy. I still have the stigma around that sometimes. And And so this comes down to, okay, this is the self-awareness. I see that by staying in this relationship, I'm perpetuating this pattern of unhealthy serial monogamy. Even though this is a good relationship, I don't feel aligned with it, but I'm afraid to leave it. I'm afraid of disappointing her. That's perpetuating those patterns. If I depart the relationship, that is my constant pattern of not sticking with something, my constant pattern of I'll just fearful avoidance. That's my attachment style. I've done work around this. That's something that I identify with. So what I'm going to speak about this idea of this tool is, but recognizing that self-awareness and going back to what you were saying about is recognizing your numb outs. And I've seen that myself last, like busyness. Oh, the productivity trap. Well, I'm being busy, and I'll catch myself like I'm eating more sugar than I normally do. I'm watching more Netflix shows than I normally do. I'm even like being a little bit workaholic state lately. I'm even having good boundaries around that. What the fuck am I avoiding? It begins with asking yourself those questions.
Ooh, that's a powerful question. What am I avoiding?
What the fuck am I avoiding right now?
Oof.
But that still is the one requirement, is that self-awareness piece.
Yeah.
And it's, if we don't have that, we can't ask that question.
Well, but I guess the way I was answering the question was, what are our tools for getting to accountability? It's that self-awareness. If there's a deeper level of how do we get that self-awareness, well, it's
I think, that seems to me like the crux of it. Like,
to foster awareness?
Yeah, like how do I build self-awareness?
Well, and a lot of people grew up in environments where it wasn't okay for them to have feelings. They were constantly emotionally
and so
carrying other people.
And then there's no awareness of them. So we're trained to not be self-aware.
Yeah, I think a good place to start with that is to ask yourself the question, how do I feel about my life right now? What are my feelings?
Yeah.
Yes. But speaking of tools, which I know you like sharing.
I just want to reframe something real quick about that. Instead of like, what am I avoiding? Even ask yourself, am I avoiding something?
Yeah.
Make it even more.
Yep. Sure.
It's like one step back. It's like more generic. To like start fostering the practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
and
great.
you have part of accountability is being honest about the positive and negative, how it comes up. So if you ask yourself, am I avoiding something? And you realize that you are, you have to give yourself some grace in that moment to not then condemn yourself and say, oh, this is who I am. This is all I'm good for. You have to say, okay, that's the way it is. What am I going to do now?
Well, and that's where curiosity is your superpower.
Yeah.
But as far as self-awareness or building self-awareness, there isn't really a simple thing to do. And certainly there's levels of self-awareness. And I think like specifically like what Devon's suggesting is potentially a pretty high level of self-awareness to be able to have that inquiry. But self-awareness really starts at a much simpler level. Like, can I be present to the sensation of air moving in and out of my nose when I breathe? Can I feel my chest expand and contract? Can I feel the sensation of rubbing two fingers together? And that is a self-awareness practice that you can do in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And that as you do that over time, you're actually building the neural pathways for self-awareness. And you can do that and increase the exercise of self-awareness to eventually help yourself reach a point where you can have an inquiry about, oh, wait a second, what is going on for me right now? Am I avoiding something right now?
Yeah.
What's the sensation associated to this right now? What is that? Does that lead me in a direction? Does that have a meaning for me? So it's all this capacity for inquiry. But for those of us that maybe feel that that is just not a skill that they've developed, it's not, I just want to say, like, that's not something that you're incapable of.
Right.
You just have to know what kind of steps to take to start to build it.
And you have to you have to understand that it, just like you said, it takes time. We're so hooked on quick fixes. You got to start small and you got to work up. That's one thing that came up last time was the idea of perfectionism. Perfectionism has stopped me from taking those small steps.
Absolutely.
Because I set a bar so high and I set out to achieve that when I wanted to create change in my life. And the bar was so high that I couldn't hit it. And then the feedback loop would be, oh, I tried, but I couldn't do it. Therefore, And then all the justification for not doing it would pop up, which would make my self-esteem dip. So in order to combat perfectionism, it goes back to the idea of starting small. And in terms of growing the skill of accountability, I just wanted to reiterate that if you are working to create some form of change in your life, set the bar really low at first. Low is not bad in this context. Low means achievable. Because in order to practice walking, you have to take a step, right? So if you want to go to the gym 5 days a week and that's your goal, start by doing 1 push-up a day. Because if you can achieve your goal, then you put the input into your brain of simply checking a box. I did it. I told myself I was going to do something, and I did it. That's what you're talking about. That will catalyze those neural pathways to start growing.
Yeah.
Don't start with holding yourself accountable to going to the gym 5 days a week. Start by walk up the stairs 1 extra time a morning.
Right.
Do something you can achieve, and then feel how that feels. Let yourself go through that step, and then start working your way up. Because I struggle with perfectionism, and if I set a bar too high, don't make it, then I will reinforce this belief that I can't do it. And the only difference was me. It wasn't what I was trying to achieve. It's how I was looking at what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think we touched on SMART agreements last time.
Yeah.
And that's a model to use to help set yourself up for success.
Do you remember what those letters stood for?
Simple, measurable, attainable. The R is about not resonance, but it fits. Like I forgot the word now. And T is time bound.
Time bound, yeah.
What is
another thing too? I want to quick add is I just want to offer like something. When I was 15 years ago, I was in an ashram in India. And they said, it's really good to do your practice every day, do your asana practice every day, which is what we call yoga here. And but they said even if it's just you do 1 sun salutation, or if you just do like 5 deep breaths and just watch them, you've done your practice for the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's
Exactly.
all it is. And I just want to offer people listening, go see a therapist. Find specifically a somatic therapist, which is all about finding sensation in the body. Even if you don't think there's something wrong, and this is for myself too, I need to now that I'm actually have this momentum and this upward swing of things, I'm feeling good about stuff. I feel like this is actually the best time for me to go see a therapist too, because that's actually when real work can get done. You're not stopping the bleeding. You're actually making yourself fitter and healthier spiritually and psychologically.
Yeah. SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound.
Yeah.
So can I finish talking about SMART and then share my poem?
Yeah.
Thank you. The SMART goals, if you're listening, you can look it up, but time bound, there are consequences to our actions. And one of the keys to growing accountability for ourselves and for others, and our ability to hold accountability and hold people accountable and do it in a compassionate, loving way and a nonviolent way, is we have to understand that we need to look at the consequences with curiosity, whether they're negative or positive, and not condemnation. If you set out to go to the gym 5 days a week and you don't, instead of making yourself wrong for it, it's important to ask yourself what happened, right? So that's where the grace comes in. Cut yourself some slack. Cut yourself some slack.
Yeah, back to curiosity.
Yeah.
Why did I not go? Curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ask yourself, how do you want to change your life? And what is the smallest possible step you could take towards that? And start there. Do it.
Yep.
And if you don't do it, when you said you were, ask yourself why.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. One small success after another is how we create change.
And that's like doing an emotional push-up. Set a small goal, accomplish it, and that was 1 push-up.
Yeah.
And once you do enough push-ups, you look jacked.
Right.
But you don't look jacked after 1 push-up, so don't expect yourself to.
Exactly.
Unless you're Ian. He's just like a Greek god.
Yeah. For those of you that know me,
I believe we call that an Adonis.
For those of you that really know me, you'll find the humor in that.
So thank you for your patience with me. I wrote this poem when I was studying integrated health and wellness coaching, and for some reason, this topic made me want to share it. So, well, first, maybe I'll share it, and then can we do our takeaway and what we're grateful for?
Sure.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's my poem. It's called Today. Today, I beat my fist into my chest against the dark, the sick unrest. Only false gain can be caused by pain. I've poured my tears into the ground, gone right up and straight back down. This life bewildering and profound. Today, I beat my fist into my chest. I howl and howl, I know we are one. I howl to our journeys being far from done. I've poured my tears into the ground. I howl at the darkness, my painful sound. But as I look into you, as I look into my pool of tears, I see your eyes looking back at me. Today I beat my fist into my chest. I am smiling, I am free. I have no more fight to give you. My plan is different, don't you see? Today, I am going to change me.
Nice.
Thanks for letting me share. I thought that, it's like, if we're suffering, how can we ask? How can we give ourselves permission to ask what's going on?
Yeah, and I like that even the poem reflects this idea of not being alone in it, like having others to look into their eyes and be reflected back. Maybe something that isn't quite aligned with what's running around in my own head.
Well, what do you think? What did you get from today? What are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit in podcasts and the community. I feel sense of community. I feel right here. I'm grateful for getting to build a new relationship with you, Ryan. I feel like I'm making a new friendship. And part of me feels like I'm actually feeling like in this really good account because I've been wanting to get into podcasting. So this is showing up here. I'm grateful for myself for just showing up here, and I feel like I have this delicious feeling that can be rare sometimes of being in account with myself.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Self-esteem is so cool.
So I'm grateful for that.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks for it.
I feel the same feeling too, by the way. Yeah.
Nice. For me, I'm really coming away with this sense of value, that we're having these conversations and there's a value that we're putting these thoughts into words and we're doing it in a way that others may choose to listen to. I hope that those that do find that same value and it serves them in some way to enlighten something for them or raise questions for them or open their curiosity for them, and that potentially can lead to something different and new. That to me is sort of what I set out in the beginning of this in terms of mission for me was to really do this so that maybe just one person suffers a little less. Mm-hmm. And I feel like these last two conversations have definitely been about suffering and how we suffer and why we suffer and what we have as choices to make differently to limit that suffering, to minimize it, and to grow as to who I am and who we are as human beings. And that feels in alignment for me. Yeah.
So I hear you talk about hope that it means something to someone else. Have you found meaning in these conversations? Have you found insight in these conversations?
I've found alignment is my biggest thing. I won't say that there's something like an aha new thing for me. I've been exploring this stuff for a long time.
That's definitely your MO.
And
you always keep everything at arm's length.
Yeah. So I appreciate being able to just be engaged in this.
I don't believe you. You found insight in our conversations. I've watched it in your eyes. You've learned something about yourself.
What have I learned? What did you see that I'm not aware of?
That's a good question. You should ask yourself and bring it to our next episode.
I just did. The biggest insight for me in this moment is, that no matter how much I feel like I'm on this journey by myself, I get to sit in this room with the two of you and hear similar journeys, similar struggles and challenges, and a sense of like, yeah, maybe I'm not completely alone. Maybe I'm not the only one suffering.
I'm going to keep poking you because that's one of my favorite things to do. Maybe you're starting to give yourself permission not to be alone. I know I am.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things I'm grateful for.
Making the commitment to do this with you is very much a challenge against my norm of being in
I've expressed that before. This is my
relationship.
Saturday morning, getting up on my day off.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, being in this relationship with you and choosing to do these things is a very intentional way of being in relationship with you, and in the last two times with Devon as well, and whoever else actually joins us, like to intentionally be in relationship.
Well, we set out to
way.
challenge ourselves and challenge each other.
Yeah.
Right? That's a big part of what is that. Do you feel, is there more before I go?
No, yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
please.
Well, thank you. I have been feeling there's been a shift for me after we've gotten into a few episodes where I was having pretty severe imposter syndrome and wondering what the heck I'm doing and if I'm actually doing something or if I'm just spinning my wheels. But there's, especially our first conversation, our last episode, I had a shift where I found value in it. It meant a lot to me, and that started to shift my imposter syndrome, and this idea got into my head. Maybe if I keep being vulnerable and I keep trying, maybe I can help someone. Because I feel like I've been able to help myself. So maybe it is worth it to keep doing this. And I am grateful for that feeling.
Me too.
Yeah, likewise. I just like to offer a reflection back. Sometimes just embodying the change you want to be, like that carries water. People respond to that, even just in your presence.
Yep, people can sense, have their own experience of that.
I've always been really, really drawn to people that are willing to be really honest. When you can cross that line from fear of what people will think of you to willingness to share anyway, that is palpable.
Yeah.
And that always felt like power to me when someone can say, yes, this is what I've done. This is how I feel. This is who I am, and stand there defiantly. I've always been drawn to people like that. I'm not okay with pushing violence onto others or putting others down, but I'm talking about being authentic, believing in yourself, giving yourself grace. Like, if you can do those things, I've always looked up to people like that. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Heard. I think it's a great place to end.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, you guys.
Thanks again, Devon.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thanks.
Tune in next time. We'll see what the
We'll see.
bleep we'll be talking about.
Exactly.
All right.